Here.
Commissioner Cohn, are you online? Commissioner Cruzen? Commissioner Evans?
Present.
Was that Evans? Commissioner Wesley?
Present.
Vice Chair Matthews? And Chair Wood?
Present. Present.
We do have a quorum. Commissioner Childs, would you be so kind as to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag?
Did you call for the city council? I didn't hear you.
Yes, I did. So you're here, Kat. How about Pam?
I'm here. She's here.
Thank you.
I pledge allegiance.
And the mic quality is very low. I can hardly hear what you're saying.
Right.
Okay, and now we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And this is an opportunity for all of us to come together this evening to talk about how important the future of Fairfield is. And to that extent, then, I hope that this is a very productive, interactive meeting, and we need to hear your comments and your opinions. So shall we begin, please?
Oh, public comment. Persons wishing to address the City Council and Planning Commission on subjects within the jurisdiction of the Council and Commission may do so at this time. They cannot discuss or take action on matters not on the agenda for this meeting, but they may briefly respond to statements made or questions raised by the public, ask for clarification from staff, refer the matter to staff, request staff to report back to them at a subsequent meeting, or place the matter on a future agenda. To speak on an agenda item, please complete a speaker's card, and I have them here, and give it to me before the prior time for public comment on that item. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Members of the public who wish to comment in lieu of doing so in person may submit comments by emailing cityclerk@fairfield.ca.gov. Comments will be provided to the Council and Commission, but will not be read aloud at the meeting. Thank you.
And our presenters, Madam Clerk, if you would, please.
Our presenters are Amy Kreimeier, Senior Planner, City of Fairfield, Rajiv Bhatia, AICP of Diet and Bhatia, Urban and Regional Planners, and Allison Moore, Diet and Bhatia, Urban and Regional Planners. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, Mayor, Council members, Planning Commissioners, everyone on Zoom. Thank you so much for attending tonight. It is a little bit different than what we normally do, so I apologize for any technical difficulties. I would also just like to note that there was a misprint in your agenda report. There was a portion of the existing conditions report missing. We have printed that out and made it available for you at your tables, as well as shared it with all the commissioners and council members attending on Zoom, and updated the agenda on the website. It's also available at www.fairfieldforward.com. And so tonight, we will be presenting the existing conditions report and the draft a visioning and guiding principles document prepared for the general plan update. This marks the end of what is the first phase of this project, and soon we will begin phase 2, options and strategies. And so tonight, the consultants, Allison and Rajiv, will give you a brief presentation on both of those documents and outreach efforts so far, as well as next steps, followed by a discussion on those documents, as well as get started on a discussion on alternatives as we move into this next phase. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Allison Moore from Daya and Bhatia.
Allison, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here in person, and hello to everyone on Zoom. As Amy mentioned, we are pleased to present tonight 2 major milestones of the Fairfield Forward 2050 project, the draft vision and guiding principles, and the existing conditions report, documents that provide us with a foundation for further development of the choices that we'll need to make to achieve future goals in the next phase of the project. The Vision and Guiding Principles is fundamentally a document shaped by community input, so we'll walk you through our major outreach activities and findings from that, and then present some additional analysis to help frame a discussion about the existing conditions report, about concepts that we'll explore in the next phase. Oops, there we go. So as Amy mentioned, we're wrapping up the first phase of the project, now having produced these documents. We've gotten to work on the housing element, and we've held our 2 public workshops and survey, which I'll talk about a little bit later. We are at the beginning of our alternatives and evaluation stage, where we'll start thinking about options for land use and circulation and other choices, and comparing the pros and cons of each. So in the next phase, we'll have additional outreach activities throughout the summer, another workshop and survey towards the end, and I did just want to note that our EIR scoping meeting will move to August. But on to the vision and guiding principles. So now I'd like to share a little bit about community engagement, what we heard from the community, and how that shaped the draft vision and guiding principles. You'll recall the goals for community engagement for this project were to engage a broad spectrum of the community, educate people about the planning process and relate it to their daily lives, build ownership, and make the process relevant and inclusive. Major activities included our 2 virtual community workshops. Sorry, skipping ahead. There we go. An online visioning survey, stakeholder interviews, outreach with FSUSD leadership groups, our general plan advisory council meetings, our visioning session, which you all participated in a few months ago, and our go-to outreach, where we went out into the community. Many full summaries of these activities, including the workshops, the surveys, and the stakeholder interviews, are available at the project website, fairfieldforward.com. So first, the community workshops. Just over 60 members of the public participated in the community workshops on Zoom, where we shared information about the general plan and its elements, and we heard from them that the prioritization of equity, diversity, and community cohesion was really important, that infill, or filling in the underutilized or vacant spaces in developed areas, was a desired development pattern, both to create mixed-use environments and preserve open space. That downtown Fairfield could be revitalized with more fun things to do, that longer-term solutions for homelessness were needed, and that dependence on the car could be lessened by creating streets that supported all different kinds of mobility choices. And as I walk you through all of the outreach activities, you'll start to hear a lot of these themes repeated, indicating a consensus, which is good. Over 270 people took the community survey, which asked people to rank their priorities for the city. And you'll see here the continued themes of diversity, preservation of Fairfield's surrounding rural and open space character, addressing homelessness, and enlivening downtown. People also prioritized a need for a greater variety of housing types, increasing pedestrian safety and comfort, and providing new job opportunities and small business support, especially top of mind for COVID, after COVID. We conducted small group discussions with members from neighborhood groups, major employers, developers, agencies, community and faith leaders, and business advocates, as well as others. And again, here, the top themes and priorities included addressing homelessness across the spectrum of need, a diversity of housing options beyond single-family and infill areas like the corridors, the value of protection of open space, as well as increasing demand for walking and biking infrastructure. Several groups emphasized the need for affordable housing as an important dimension. And then activities for youth also came up, as well as emphasizing Fairfield's existing economic assets, such as its water infrastructure, strength in food manufacturing in proximity to the Suisun Valley, and its regional location to promote economic growth and opportunity. Perhaps the most fun was engaging members of FSUSD's Student Advisory Council and student leader groups in 2 meetings where we spoke with them about what city planning is and why their perspective was so valuable as young people who would be growing up with the plan. We did a virtual Post-it note activity, you can kind of see that there, and we asked them to share what they liked about their neighborhood and about Fairfield and what they would change. Being able to get around under their own power was important, as were other opportunities for entertainment. The mall was described as a big hangout place. And youth believed that closer, more cohesive communities were safer ones. And some perceived that neighborhood resources and amenities were not equally distributed across all neighborhoods. We have a general plan advisory committee made up of 13 members who have a diverse representation of perspectives. We've met 4 times so far, and they act as a really important sounding board for concepts and ideas in the general plan, as well as community ambassadors. And they have been instrumental in pushing us to ensure that our materials are accessible. That's why there's a shortened version of the vision and guiding principles and the ECR on the project website. They shared that the general plan should address the importance of agriculture and a healthy food system, as well as safety and accessibility in public spaces, preserving the existing housing stock as an important component of affordability, and planning for all segments of the community. So you'll recall our initial visioning session with you all in February, and some of the many great ideas you had included transportation safety, better connections and link to agricultural and open space, a variety of housing options, the potential for transformation of the mall, as well as at North Texas Street, preparing the workforce for the jobs of tomorrow, and again, a focus on equity, including access to opportunities and amenities. And then finally, we've done targeted go-to outreach with various Fairfield groups in partnership with our sub-consultant, Diversity RD Global, a local organization. And this includes conversations and a presentation with regional union leaders who are interested in housing issues and the potential for downtown development and economic development and job training. We've had conversations with Filipino interest groups who raised the issue of jobs-housing balance and addressing long commutes. We've had conversations with Latino business owners who spoke about issues with safety and homelessness impacting their businesses and clients, future opportunities for economic growth, the need for support of migrant workers through transportation opportunities and housing options for those who live in Fairfield but who work in the surrounding farm areas. And in the span of a month to our in-person event at La Favorita grocery store, the outreach team spoke to over 300 shoppers who raised issues about housing, improved transportation options, including the fact that there's no service on Sundays, more activities and entertainment, and spaces for youth and safety. And now that the farmers market is back, we'll have a presence there during certain weeks over the summer. At the first event, people reiterated the need for more things to do and more community resources and amenities. So we took this feedback and created the draft vision and guiding principles document before you tonight. The vision reflects the community's aspirations for Fairfield's future. It is the summary of the shared goals to be achieved by the general plan. And the guiding principles elaborate upon the vision and will provide guidance to detailed policies that we'll develop later on. So there are 9 guiding principles, and later we'll be asking you if you feel like those adequately capture community input, but I'll just read the vision statement. Fairfield builds upon its strengths: a charming downtown, thriving and diverse neighborhoods, economic assets, and inviting, attractive natural surroundings, and agricultural and ecological resources, to blossom into a complete, vibrant city, a place renowned for walkable, affordable, and pleasant neighborhoods with ample open space amenities, economic prosperity and opportunity, social stability and equity, and cultural, entertainment, and recreational possibilities. And in the Vision and Guiding Principles full document, you'll see even more of a description about what the vision looks like. So you'll see here, in what I just described, the key themes for community outreach. It addresses an array of housing types, economic opportunity, an improved transportation network that allows for all types of modes and methods of transportation, connected and diverse neighborhoods, connections to open space and agriculture, environmental sustainability, healthy and safe communities, revitalization along key corridors, and then creating community cohesion and sense of place by celebrating and showcasing Fairfield's diversity. So next, I'll just briefly be going over the existing conditions report, which, as you can see, you could use it to prop open your door. It's a long document. It represents the first major technical step in the update. It provides information on the resources, trends, and concerns for each of the topic areas in the plan, and helps us gain an understanding of all the opportunities and constraints, which will be layered on and analyzed to help us come up with different options that we'll evaluate with the community, who can pick and choose which concepts people feel will be most effective in achieving the vision. There are 13 chapters plus a market analysis covering everything from land use and community design to soils to wildfire. And within that existing conditions report, the key findings are found at the end of each chapter. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but some key findings of note. Fairfield's current housing stock is predominantly single-family, and single-family residential makes up about 18% of the total existing land area. In comparison, multifamily is about 1% of the existing land use area. We'll need to think about future distribution of land use when we're thinking about alternatives. There are 2,400 acres of vacant land within the city limits, with most of this acreage occurring in the northeast and most of it being zoned industrial. Fairfield is located near prime farmland, and development must be balanced with the pressures that may come on it on farmland. There are a number of natural hazards, Fairfield being in California, and threats to take into consideration when we're planning what land uses go where, to avoid exposure of people and property to these hazards. I'll show a map of this in a minute. Fairfield is short of meeting its Park Service acreage goals, but of greater concern too are maintenance issues and funding for that. And some places do lack park access. Planning for continued operation of Travis remains an important focus, and thus considerations of airport land use compatibility and airport noise represent planning considerations as well. There are opportunities to improve the multimodality of streets to make it safer, more comfortable, and more convenient to get around by walking or biking. And multimodality, I just mean that different types of uses can occur on the street. And then future planning must address diversity, social equity, and preventing displacement as new development occurs. And if there are any questions on any of the topics or content in the existing conditions report, we can also make time for that in the discussion. I also just want to share a little bit from the market analysis, which provides a range of projections for future demand. Those projections include 3 scenarios: the baseline, or based on projections from the Association of Bay Area Governments, known as ABAG; accelerated projections, which represent Fairfield capturing a bit more of the county's growth; and a maximum scenario, where development would be expected to be on par with the region's growth. And so to accommodate this growth, Fairfield would be expected to need to develop between 7,500 and 10,000 new housing units. And ranges for types of non-residential development vary based on those scenarios. You can see just how much they vary by non-residential land use type in that bar graph at the bottom of the screen. The existing conditions report also conducted an analysis of opportunity sites, and those are areas that have the greatest potential to see change over the long term. This could mean development of vacant land, a change in land use to something else, or perhaps even a greater intensity of development or more of something on a site. So to identify where these are, we mapped vacant land and underutilized land. Underutilized meaning parcels where there could be incentive to redevelop because of either of two reasons. It has a land value that is greater than the value of the building itself, or where the building area only covers a small portion of the actual parcel size, and that's called floor area ratio. And it would ultimately be up to the landowner to develop or redevelop. Some of these clusters of opportunity sites are already considered as part of the Heart of Fairfield plan or the train station specific plan, but some of these other areas will be considered in context of infrastructure needs, environmental considerations, and other factors. This map on the screen here represents a simplified map of the opportunity site areas, and we can see clusters in Cordelia, at the Solano Town Center, north of Cordelia Road in the sewer district, that industrial area, along North Texas, and west to southwest of the train station specific plan area. And so when we begin to layer on some of the constraints, it's a busy map, I know, but the layers here include fault risk, so we consider where there might be fault lines, and the areas around it would need to have geotechnical investigation just because of, it's kind of risky. Wildfire, which is that hatch there, and on the side panel you can see that those are areas where there is an increased risk for utility-associated wildfires. Flooding, that blue hatch represents the 100-year flood zone, which means there's a 1% chance of those areas flooding annually. And then airport hazards. So those pink lines represent the airport land use compatibility zones, which have certain development requirements. The zone C means that no buildings over 35 feet can occur there, and there can't be any sensitive uses like residential or institutional uses. And the area affected by Zone C is just part of the train station specific plan up in the northeast corner there. So with that in mind, we are hoping to have a discussion this evening about whether the vision and guiding principles adequately capture community input, and then based on that existing conditions detail I shared, where should growth be happening? What might the possibilities be for specific areas that you would like to call out, and what might be some ways to connect the different components of Fairfield, being Cordelia, the central Fairfield, and the northeast portion of Fairfield. And then before I turn it over to Rajiv or the mayor to facilitate, I just want to share some next steps too. We'll be having our 5th GPAC meeting next Thursday on the 24th, where we will be discussing the alternatives. They're open to the public. Now that we're opened up, we'll be having more in-person events. We'll have a presence and a booth at the 4th of July celebration, at the Tomato Fest in August, and then additional farmers markets events on Thursdays. We'll continue to develop the draft plan alternatives over the summer, and then end of summer, early fall, we will have our other citywide engagement activities. So I'll flip back to this and then turn it over to Rajiv. Thank you so much.
Listen, before you
Sure.
turn to the next step, are there any comments or questions, colleagues, as well as from the public, on what you've seen and heard so far? Commissioner Childs, please.
I just had one comment. Now that we've come back from this pandemic, and maybe it doesn't belong in this report, but I guess my question would be is, do we have any type of planning outline or structure for how do we manage during the pandemic if we should have another one?
We will be considering effects of the pandemic. It's kind of hard to predict trends as they will happen immediately after. I think we're all still trying to figure that out. But in terms of planning for open space and what our recreational needs might be, how that might factor into community design, I think that would definitely be something that we consider.
Thank you.
From Joe Green Heffern, he'd like to make a comment. To the mic.
This relates to item 1D, kind of on, as you think ahead to the alternatives, but it really relates to the existing conditions report. The alternatives really are reflecting 30 years down the road, and I think it's important to have a correct vision for the context that may be different than our current conditions, and in particular, transportation. The state rail plan calls for a connection basically between the Sassoon-Fairfield Amtrak corridor and Highway 101 with a smart line by 2040. So there will be major, at least the vision is for major transit going around the north side of the bay, and that's going to be a very different change in the type of opportunities for freight, for passenger going around the North Bay. So I think, Pete, as we're thinking about alternatives, we need to make sure we're viewing 30 years from now is different than how people are traveling today. So basically there will be other alternatives to get from 80 and Fairfield over to Highway 101 and the 101 corridor. So I think that's important. The other item is Plan Bay Area 2050. The draft EIR is out and comments are available through July 20th. So I guess my specific question is, as you're thinking through alternatives, will the alternatives you're considering mate up with Plan Bay Area 2050's alternatives, or are they going to be different? I don't know the correct answer, but it would certainly help if they at least aligned in some fashion with Plan Bay Area 2050, their proposed plan and their alternatives. So that's just a comment about moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing those observations. Any other speakers, please? Yes. Councilmember Thomason, go ahead,
You
please.
need to speak in.
Mr. Mayor, I had some questions on this. Do we want to finish the presentation and then we'll ask our questions at the end, or?
Well, I think it's going to be incremental until we get ourselves really underway here. So you go ahead and start, please.
So I just had some questions on the Travis Air Force Base. Do we have anybody that's on the GPAC from Travis or that's involved with Travis? Do you know? I guess I'm asking.
Spoken with them about specific issues. So they were part of the stakeholder group that we interviewed, and their comments are actually incorporated as part of the stakeholders report.
And then I didn't see on this, and I'm sure it's coming, but addressing infill. Are we looking at that too? Okay. And then I had some questions on the mission statement, but we can get to that later, and on the floodplain. But do we have a top 3 or 5 priorities that we would address first, or are we going through the motions right now just to get us all up to speed and kind of bring all these questions at the end?
Right, so we are not looking for you to select from the guiding principles or anything like that and come up with the top 5. We are looking for 2 things from you today. The first is that you have the vision and the guiding principles document. We would like you to take a look at that, tell us if the vision statement needs any changing. Are you okay with the guiding principles? Is something missing from that? So if you can spend, like, I don't know, maybe just go around once, confirm that, or take 15 minutes on that, and then we want to brainstorm as part 2 on anything on the alternatives you would like to see. If there are specific areas you think belong better for housing, Are there infill opportunity areas and so on? That's the second thing we want to hear from you. We are not looking for you to prioritize anything here at
Okay,
this meeting.
good. And we're early in the stage. I do have some, I would like to address the vision statement as we move forward, but I just wanted to get that out there now. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Vaccaro, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, it looks like we are on the discussion part now, right? Vision and guiding principles. So if we're going to talk about the vision and guiding principles, you know, I'm glad that number 9 is in there, create community cohesion and sense of place by celebrating and showcasing Fairfield's diversity. You know, we talk a lot about this, but we don't do much about it. And that's my concern, okay? That we always talk about how Fairfield diversity is the strength of our city, and it's been the strength of our city for a long time, and it's even getting more diverse. So I think that's something that if we're really going to do this, and we're really going to showcase who we are and the citizens that live here, I think that has to be a very strong guiding principle, one of the top ones. Because, like I said, we talk about it, and, you know, for not lack of a better phrase, that talk is cheap, right? But we really do need to do something about it. And so I'm glad that it's in there, but I would like to see what plans we have around that. Because, I mean, I have ideas about it, and that I think need to be implemented. But that's a whole discussion for another day. But I just wanted to bring that up right now. I know that it sounds like we're at that phase of the meeting right now, so I did want to bring that up. So, and then that's it for now.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Moy,
It's
please,
Kat
go ahead.
Moy, sorry. Can you hear me? I think that we need to do two things. Touch on them a little bit here in the guiding principles. It's really, really important. The two biggest drivers right now for our economic stability in our city and in fact the county is agriculture and the Travis Air Force Base. I don't think we should just, as the Vice Mayor just said, just point it out. We need to know what are we going to do to continue or to do a better job even of protecting the right to farm in the Suisun Valley, the unincorporated areas around us. And what are we doing? And we do a lot of it with TRAF and everything, but specifically in our general plan to protect Travis Air Force Base. For instance, I think, Mr. Mayor, I'm sure you've seen this, but almost 2 years ago, I broke a story about thousands and thousands of acres being bought up around the base by, an anonymous buyer. And those are the kind of things that we can't just shrug our shoulders at and go, oh, well. And I'll be writing another story soon that says who these people are. Anyway, the bottom line is we need to understand and appreciate, just like we appreciate our diversity, appreciate that these are big job centers for us and bring a lot of money. So that's my point, and I know we'll go more into it later. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other comments, colleagues?
Mr. Mayor, Charles Wood.
Okay.
I'd like to make sure that in our guiding principles and in our look at the general plan that we make sure that we are identifying opportunities for growth in private industrial employment. I noticed the opportunity areas don't include large parcels, and that although we want to protect agriculture, we want to look at opportunities to bring in large employers to as Councilman Moy stated, our large economic drivers are not private industrial employers, and we need to diversify and make sure that we have the land and the opportunity to bring those in when the time comes, and be it 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councilwoman Tanjuro, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a comment regarding the guiding principles. So in number 1, it says connected neighborhoods, and then also on number 5, it says connected to open space and agriculture. So I think just defining what that actually means. What does that mean when a neighborhood is connected to another, and what does that look like when our open spaces is connected to community, and what can we do, to better clarify or define that?
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other comments?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, go ahead, please.
Pam
Councilwoman
Bertani, I just want to say thank you for a great presentation, number 1. And just number 2, I just want to just say that at some point, the city is going to have to take, more seriously affordable housing. We have to talk about what affordable housing is going to look like in the city of Fairfield, because the train has already left the station, and we need to really, I know that we've talked about affordable housing, but I just want to challenge us to really nail down some founding principles on what affordable housing is going to look like, because a lot of the, issues in Fairfield revolve around homelessness and the collateral impacts of homelessness on this city. And one of the solutions to that is affordable housing. And so as we go through this process, I really want to challenge myself and my colleagues about how that's going to look with the developers, with the community impacts, how that's going to look in the city of Fairfield. So I just want to say affordable housing to me is at the top of my list in terms of real strategies to move forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, and I'll just respond by saying that yesterday, some of us were out at One Lake, that development east of the eastern portion of Fairfield, not too far from the train station, and there are 199 affordable housing units in that project, and they're mixed in with other market rate housing as well. So that's a good beginning in a new part of Fairfield. Yeah. Other comments, anyone?
And if I can just respond real quick, Mr. Mayor, I think that part of our affordable housing strategy has got to look at, triaging, mental health, addressing the mental health issues of some of our folks who are homeless, who are, on the streets right now, who may not be acceptable for that kind of housing. And I'm just saying that I don't know what the requirements are, but does affordable housing look like having some kind of mental health triage service on site at certain places so that the folks who are homeless can get the services and the resources they need to become, people who can stand on their own 2 feet. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it.
And thank you very much for pointing out those necessary needs as well. If there are no other comments, Councilman Tim, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. One of the things I wrote down is define affordable housing. Affordable housing here in Fairfield for a family of 4 the income is about $62,000. Joseph, you brought up a good point. We're thinking out 30 years. I don't have a problem with the vision statement. I don't have a problem with the roadmap that you laid out. And maybe I'm jumping ahead. I don't know what's going to go in the city, and I don't know where yet. And I don't know where the city boundaries are going to go. And for me, that's a very important part of the planning boundaries, the planning area, and our urban limit line. You talked about whether it's high-speed rail or a connection to 101, and if that's the case, what boundaries does the city have to have? And once I think we fill out the outer boundaries, then we can start talking about what we're going to put on the inside of those boundaries. And I don't want to get too far ahead of thank you. I don't want to get too far ahead of, we're talking about diversity and different types of housing, but I'm also looking at where is this housing going to go? Where's the industrial centers going to go? Do we want the big industrial centers? And that's, I think, what I'm looking at from this, because I think we've covered probably everything you can cover as far as from socioeconomic, where are we going to put it? And if we do, how are we going to put it there? And where's that growth going to go? So I'd like to fairly soon establish our boundaries. How are we going to know if you want to put in something for rail? Where are you going to put that? Cordelia, Green Valley area is cherry stemmed off of what I consider to be central Fairfield. Transportation is a huge part of this, and in 30 years, I think autonomous cars are going to be as routine as probably a cell phone. So how are we going to grow into that area and the ability to grow? So that's the thought process that I have right now, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, go ahead, please. Want to come up here to the microphone, please? Is he okay there?
So just as a follow-up to that, do you have any thoughts or ideas about where you would like the city boundary to be expanded and be tested as part of the alternatives? Yes. You want to tell us?
Thanks, Bill. What are our boundaries going to be? How far out into Cordelia are you going to go? How far out into Green Valley or Suisun Valley are you going to go? Northeast, I think, is pretty much impacted now by Travis Air Force Base. Cap Moy brought up an issue that we've known about now for a little over a year. Somebody is buying up large parcels of land, mostly in the Rio Vista area. But is that a threat? Is that a challenge? What is that? I mean, it's something that we need to think about. Is somebody 30 years from now want to put another city out there? How do we protect what we have in Fairfield? Where do we actually draw what I said at one time on the dais, the Mason-Dixon line? This is where our city will grow, and then we will stop at this boundary. And that's why in preparation for this, you know, we get hit up by developers all the time, and they want us to annex property, and they want to bring in, you know, different housing or whatever. And I tell them, and I think everybody else does, is submit it to the general plan, because we're spending an inordinate amount of money and a lot of time for this. And is this something we want to consider? And I think that if any annexations should be decided here and in public, and then once we're done until 2050. So in 30 years, where do we want the city to be? So I want to concentrate on Cordelia, Green Valley area, obviously the Northeast area. We're buffered on the south side by Suisun, and we have the Vacaville, Fairfield Greenbelt. But the cherry stem really concerns me. And what I'm talking about, the area of Interstate 80, Rockville Road, because we have actually a fairly good-sized city in the Cordelia area, but we're separated from what I consider to be central Fairfield. And I think that's an important aspect we need to look at.
Thank you. Allison, come back to you now, please.
We don't have anything specific to say, but I think you raise a very good point, and to the extent you're going around, we want to hear from others as well about the willingness, the desire to perhaps grow the city boundaries, or where else you see growth happening. So that is very good, and thank you for that. Yeah. Of the Planning Commission or the City Council willing for us to, or wanting for us to explore how to grow in some of these areas as well? What do people think about that? Anyone?
Yes, this is Kat Moy. Well, is the question whether we want to actually do annexations now during the general plan process, or put our boundaries in such areas that people can annex or we can move out? What is the specific question? I think that there are areas that I personally would think would be off limits. And I agree with Chuck in that we really need to address this cherry stem, which was the linear trail, and what exactly we're going to do. Cordelia and lesser so, I think, in the Green Valley area, they feel very much a lot of time like they are not really part of Fairfield. We need to do better about that. I think part of that can be in planning. They need some, businesses out there and so on. And so I think that that's something that I would just, on the top of my head say we need to include some area that you could do some more area that we may annex, that we could do commercial and or industrial, as Commissioner Wood was saying. We need to do, I envision a larger industrial area so we can bring in jobs in which people can survive here in Fairfield with true livable wages, not minimum wage. And also, and I hope, this doesn't make anybody's head explode, but there are parts of Susan Valley that would be the one side of Rockville Road. I actually own property in there, so know that I have a conflict. But that area is not farmed much at all anymore. You have the Sikh temple. Before that, you have, it's already businesses and so on. And then you move on. What I'm saying is I think that side of Rockville Road could ultimately be some kind of, part of Fairfield and used for agritourism and those type of businesses, but the city would serve much better in that than the county has. As you can see, the county, we've put all growth inside cities for a reason, but I think that it has to be very specific that if we do annex for that area, that it would be for not housing, but for jobs related to agriculture. And then I wouldn't oppose that kind of thing. But the rest of Susan Valley, I think you leave that alone. It's not that big of a valley. I don't see a lot of pressure, but that side of Rockville Road runs into the college and so on. And you do have, the vineyards that the Tin Brinks own, for instance, but that would be compatible with whatever else we would do in the city there, because it would be agritourism. But I just think we would do a much better job, again, than the county itself. So that's just something that I would put out there, and agree in concept with what Councilman Tim was saying. I think that's really smart to think about. And as far as inclusion and so on, yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to make it clear that I'm not advocating for or against annexation, but what I'm saying is understand the pressures are there, and is that somewhere we are willing to look at in the future. And again, we're thinking out 30 years, and I talk about the urban limit line, and I am concerned, obviously, about the Cordelia area. But the point I'm trying to make is we need to have a drop deadline. And by that, I mean we will consider annexation here, not saying we're going to approve it, but part of our urban limit line, that perhaps in the future that we that could be annexed if we so decided, or a future council so decided. But what is the area anywhere in Fairfield, and we're right now focusing out in the valley, that we will not go? We will not plan, we will have no future plans, and it will remain agriculture. That's what I'm looking at. So we can give direction to staff, because once we set our boundaries or our limits, that lets developers know, lets the farmers know, that now we are going to focus in filling in the areas that we have an identified boundary. And I think that's probably the most important, because the pressures coming out of the Bay Area, and you look at housing and everybody wants to grow. Well, look at some of the Class A grapes we have out there. And I spent a lot of years on the Suisun Valley Fund Advisory Board, and we didn't spend that time, and I said I was a representative to the city, but with us and the county and the growers and the vintners and the landowners, and that idea finally has paid off, and all the planning is paid off. So we, I think, owe it to people that live there, the developers, and most importantly, the farmers and the landowners. This is what we agreed on a long time ago, so they know when we say we're not going past X line, that we're not going to do that. And that is very important, because once we've set the boundaries, then we can concentrate on the infill. Then we can concentrate on transportation and everything else that was the 13 areas that we just touched on briefly. But I think we have to set the boundaries, and whether you do it, you're not going to do it tonight, but I'm hopeful that the gist of the conversation will be, Fairfield's serious. There will be boundaries set, and we're not going to go past those boundaries. You look at the land around Anheuser-Busch, a lot of people don't know, that's in the county. Is that good for annexation? I would say yes, it is. Now you say, what are you going to put there? Well, obviously it's an industrial area. And you have to look at continuing trends, and I'm not an economy. I don't know, but you look at the buildings that they're building. You look at Amazon, right? They're going to be future Amazons. I don't know how many of you shop at the mall. I don't think in 10 years the mall is going to be what we think it is today. I think you'll actually be, somebody's going to be living there, in my opinion. So these are the things that we need to look at as far as infill, but just tell me how far out we're going to go. Tell me these, color within the lines, Chuck. Tell me these are the boundaries, and then we'll start the infill. So, Mayor, thanks for letting me ramble on.
Councilman Vaccaro, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to follow up on what my colleagues have said, and also Planning Commissioner Wood. I think Planning Commissioner Wood back in February had stated about, there is some land in the county near the city that, and I think Councilman Moya said this, about land not being farm, that you can't farm. And I understand that, and I think that that's, obviously areas we do need to look at. But, the word pressure came up, and I think we really need to look at what that word means, because we're going to get pressure from a lot of different people. And I think, to feel pressure for development is something we really have to get ready for, because, one thing I do not want to see is any development in the valley where it can still be used as to grow grapes, for farming, to grow fruit trees. I just, that's one thing, and I think all my colleagues would agree with that. We have a long history here in Fairfield. I mean, my wife talks about, cutting fruit down at German's Cutting Shed. Like, I think everybody who grew up in Fairfield, I didn't grow up in Fairfield, but I know a lot of people who did that all worked there. And, whenever we take a ride through the valley, we talk about that. So I think the pressure that we're going to get is from, hey, maybe we do need to develop this, but we really need to sort of back off on that pressure and realize what's important to our city. But as Planning Commissioner Wood said back in February, and Chuck, I hope I'm not, talking about you too much, but you made a lot of sense about, not if there's land out there that's fallow and can't be farmed, or there's nothing happening, and it's near the city, maybe that's something we need to take a look at as far as annexation. But anything to me that's even close to the city that can still be used for agriculture, or anything that we're, to beautify our area, I think we really need to look at not annexing that, and, keeping it where it is and keeping it in the agricultural realm. And I understand what you're saying too, Councilman Moy. I know that's a different area that I'm talking about. But I think the word pressure is going to be key here in the future for all of us. And we're going to have to take a good look at ourselves and decide what we really want to do. Do we want to keep certain areas the way it is? Do we want to grow certain areas, as Councilman Tim said, which makes a lot of sense too. But I think we need to be extremely careful about where we do this and how we do this and what decisions we're going to make, as a council. And we really need to listen to the citizens out there, not only the citizens of Fairfield, but the citizens around Fairfield that this could be affected, who could be affected by this. So this is going to take a lot of really deep thought, a lot of strategy, and a lot of feelings, because feelings will come into this. So that's really all I have to say, Mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, and I just want to add that I'm just advocating for the discussion. I generally agree with Councilwoman Moy, Tim, and the Vice Mayor. And if it's up to me, anything north of Rockville Road is sacred, and you don't want to take out any producing agriculture. But I just think we need to have the discussion and take a look at what we're missing in our land use. And I just saw a big hole with regard to private industry land in large parcels, and I do see also that land in the county that's designated for agriculture, and as Councilwoman Moy said, it's not farming, it's not being productively used for agriculture. So I just think we need to have the discussion.
The attorney. Thank you very much. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah. Okay.
I think we should just clarify that wasn't me, that was
Okay.
someone else. Who's next?
I can't hear him. What do you say do next?
I think we just asked for any more comments, and if we don't have any.
Okay. If there are no other comments, then we'll move on, please. Okay. Thank you.
I think that's it. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask if there are any other questions or any comments about the vision or guiding principles before we move on to more discussion about ideas for the alternatives.
We are sort of there. I think I asked them about the maybe Texas Street Corridor possibilities for that. Okay.
So if there aren't any more comments on that, if we could turn our attention to the opportunity areas. I had mentioned Cordelia. Someone brought up the fact that there isn't that much retail out there, but what might we want to see in the Cordelia area, the industrial area near Anheuser-Busch, North Texas Street, what does that look like in the future? And then any of the land to the west or southwest of the station, the train station specific plan area.
Right, and the mall itself as well. Councilmember Tim you mentioned that the mall is not going to look like this in 10 years' time, but what possibilities do you see for the mall as well? Yeah.
Can you repeat that, please?
It's about the mall as well. Councilmember Tim said that the mall will not look like this in 10 years' time. So let's talk about the possibilities for these areas as well, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I think that you're finding that people wanting to live in a single-family residential on a quarter acre, I think that's great in some areas, and some people still want that. I can only speak personally. I'm done with that. I want to live where I have amenities, where I can walk to the store, where I don't need to get in my car, where I don't have to cut the grass. And I guess that happens when you get older. Then you look at the young professionals. I look at my kids on the weekend, they want to go do things. They don't want to do yard work. Just society has changed. I think the malls, as we know them today, stores go out of business, and I think that's because people, they let their fingers do their shopping and they do it on their phone and they order and the truck drops it off. So what do you do when you have a large area like Solano Mall? I'm not saying it's going to go completely out of business, but I look at a doctor's office that was rehabbed in the 2800 block of North Texas, 2900 block of North Texas. Had a lot of offices in there, and they gutted it and they turned them into one-bedroom apartments. And then they built a small, I believe, a 3-story apartment behind it. And there's such a demand for those. And somebody was thinking outside the box, and I didn't understand how you could turn doctor's offices into apartments. People can do that, and they did it quite well. So we talk about moving into the center of town. You talk about you want transportation, you want walkability, you want a nightlife. It's close to North Texas. It's basically the center of town. But don't forget, North Bay Hospital is across the street, and they just did a $200 million expansion. And we are known, we have Sutter, we have North Bay, we have Kaiser, you have Genentech in Vacaville. And one of the things that the Assistant City Manager and I talked about earlier today is, a long time ago, it's good for Fairfield, but we have to banish that thought, because what's good for Fairfield is good for Suisun, and also vice versa, but also for the surrounding area, whether it be county, whether it be Vacaville or Vallejo. But housing is not going to change, and the demand for housing, I saw, you said that it could be up to 10,000 homes. Well, where are you going to put 10,000 homes? And that's why I talked about, I would like to see, okay, this is the line, we don't cross the line, now what are we going to do on the inside? How can we interconnect us and the city of Suisun again? We put in Highway 12, which was great for everybody blowing through Fairfield, but basically we choked off the city of Suisun. And how can we change that? We have a train station there. Well, it's Suisun's train station, but it's ours if you live on our side of the tracks. How can you easily walk from Fairfield, downtown Fairfield, and walk to get on a train, especially Amtrak there, because we have Capitol Corridor out in the northeast part, right? And it's growing and growing, and a lot of people I know actually take the train to work. And it's like, where do you work? And they said, well, it's easy. You can go a million different places. So that's the kind of things that I'm concentrating on, is how do you get the people to live where they live, but how can you move them, let them walk, take a bike, autonomous cars. But back specifically to Solano Mall or large buildings like that, that's prime for residential. And I'm not saying that you also have to say no commercial. One of the things, we had a project here a couple of years ago that was voted down. I was very disappointed, but it was the old Orchard Supply Hardware on Travis Boulevard. They talked about 4 stories up with residential and then commercial down below. And I think that's something that we have to consider, especially now downtown. We're revitalizing downtown. Why can't you have 2- and 3-story, maybe even a 4-story down there, where you have a place for people to live, but they can go downstairs to a restaurant or a fine design shop, because you're still going to need buildings, stores where people can go in and look, whether it be sporting goods, whether it be bridal dresses, whether somebody's giving piano lessons. You still need to have that there, but I don't think you need something as the size of Solano Mall. And you look at all the space around there, and I don't know how many acres it is. David Feinstein could probably tell me, but it's a very large area, and it's right in the center of Fairfield. So that's the idea. That we had a council candidate, 10, 12 years ago, that said, make it senior living, and everybody laughed at him, and so did I. And I'm kind of thinking now, that guy had a vision just probably 10 or 12 years too early. because that's, I think, where we're going. You look at demographics, the people that are moving here, how many children you're having, and it's a whole, I guess, just a class on humanity. And this is where I think that we have the ability for the next 30 years to plan, what are we going to do with the people that are here? I made a comment one day on the dais, and we talked about housing, and there was a lady in the audience, and I said, where are your grandkids going to live? And she said, certainly not in Fairfield. And I said, yeah, you just made my point. We talk about affordable housing, affordable anymore. If you can find a house in Fairfield under $500,000, good luck. And it just rolls off the tip of our tongue, $500,000. That's crazy. I mean, where's it going to be in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? So this is what I want to concentrate on, is where are the people going to live? We have great businesses here. We have businesses here that a lot of people don't know about that would actually blow your mind. They need qualified workers. So you need to communicate. They need to have a place to live. They don't want to drive. So this, when I think about the general plan, this is what I think about. And I'm kind of probably got off the topic of Solano Mall, but just pick a large area of town, maybe large businesses that may or may not be there, and just go from there. But we have to have a place to shelter our citizens. They need a place to live that they want to live. And then to what Pam Bertani talked about and what the Vice Mayor talked about is diversity and different costs. They all don't have to be, $1 million single family residential. I don't think you can buy a condo in Fairfield. And what I'm talking about is we have 3- and 4-story apartment buildings coming, but you can't buy them. You have to rent them. Well, why don't we have those? And everybody says, well, you want those? Go to Walnut Creek. Well, folks, we're going to be the next Walnut Creek. Is it going to be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? I can't answer that. But that's the kind of things that I look at when you talk about housing diversity and housing for all. That's extremely important. So, Mayor, thank you, sir.
Mr. Vice Mayor, please. Oh, go ahead, Councilman Tim, go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You did a great job. Give me a great blast for that.
Okay.
Heard from those two in the corner, thoughts, ideas from you, yeah?
They want to hear from you guys.
Get close to that mic. Excuse my voice. So with regards to the Solano Mall, I think that there is a lot of opportunity that we can do there. Thinking outside the box, being innovative. And my mind goes to when I was living in Asia and how some of these high-density areas were very community-oriented, right? And so that's what I envision. It'd be a very community-oriented transit neighborhood where it's a gathering spot. There's, everything's there that you need. Daycare, there's tutoring rooms, there's a piano, there's a waiting area. It's easy transit hub. That's what I envision. A walkable community. I mean, for people my age, I live alone, and it's been noted, it's not cheap to find a place by myself. And I think about my siblings, and they're all around my same age, and where are they going to live? And 2 are currently still living at home. They can't afford anything on their own. So they always come to my mind when we have this discussion. But I really think that we have the opportunity to create housing for, single young professionals. But again, it needs to be somewhere where they want to live. So what does that look like? And again, I think it's more about, for people, I guess my age, it's about, the community is important. Being able to walk to the coffee shop, being able to just hop on a bus to get to the train station. Just easy access to life, to life things that we look forward to. Restaurants and things to do in the evening, parks, so.
Thank you, Councilwoman Pangiorno. Vice Mayor Vaccaro, please.
Yeah. This is getting off the topic of the mall a little bit, actually totally, but one thing that was brought up in the stakeholders meetings were more opportunities for youth. And, you know, I think every successful city I've seen throughout California has, I mean, we do have the PAL Center, and it's a great PAL Center. We saw last night. We had, you know, our Students of the Month, and they were awesome. But that's one place. And we have such a big city, we really do need to have more youth centers in different parts of the city. Because like I said, every city I've seen that is successful has that. Because somebody who lives in Cordelia isn't going to make it down to the PAL Center, necessarily. Somebody who lives on parts of the west side are not going to make it down. Parts of the east, all the way to the east near Travis, are not going to make it down. So as we develop this general plan and what we really want to see, I think we have to take that into consideration and include it in one of the guiding principles. It has to be, or it's not going to be successful, because the young people are our future. And if they don't have an outlet, like they did not have at all during the pandemic, like none of us did, but you know, people don't realize how much it affected the young people. You know, I mean, I've worked with at-risk youth for a long time, and I know, even having talked to some of them recently, that this pandemic had a huge impact on them. Because with all that energy, you know, and when you're young and you have all that energy, it's pent up, it's going to go somewhere, it might go somewhere negative. So I'd like to see that in our general plan, where we have different youth centers around the city of Fairfield. I think it's imperative to the success of this plan. So.
Risha?
Mr. Mayor?
Zoom, Mr.
Okay.
Matthews, and then Larisha.
Okay, we have somebody on Zoom, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Chris Matthews here. Can you hear me all right? Sound check, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you, Chris.
Okay, well, I just wanted to make a couple quick points. With respect to housing diversity, one of the things that the Planning Commission passed recently for consideration to the council is reducing the size of individual homes. And on the Planning Commission, I've sort of taken on the mantra of campaigning for tiny homes as one form of that diversity. And I would encourage us as a group to be giving that some consideration in the general plan and have a little more thought about that. The other quick item I wanted to make, having spent a fair amount of my time in the retail redevelopment industry and now serving as real estate director for North Bay across the street from the mall, and having had various negotiations with them, I just want everyone to understand that's a very complex ownership structure. And while I totally agree that it needs to change to entertainment, housing, and other types of activities, you've got the anchors that are owned separate from the main mall area, separate from many of the pads. So it's going to be some challenge and take some time to work through all those issues. Thank you.
Any other comments, colleagues?
Larisha?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you. This is Pam Bertani. I just want to say thank you to my colleagues who are making this meeting for me very easy, because they're bringing up the issues that we really need to address in this city. And Chuck Tim, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I couldn't say it any better than how you said it, in terms of the importance of us focusing on the mixed use aspect of property in Fairfield. You know, I grew up in Oakland. And as most of you probably know, Oakland is right next door to Emeryville. And when I grew up, Emeryville was a ghost town. And we used to actually call it a ghost town, because that's what it was. Well, what is Emeryville today? Emeryville, California today is an example of what Chuck Tim just described. You know, I mean, in today's time, you know, a lot of folks don't want, the younger folks don't want the big 5,000 square foot, you know, house that with the lawn and the backyard. They want to live where they live, close to transportation and shop. And I don't know who it was in Emeryville who figured this out, but they figured it out in a tremendous way, So a ghost town called Emeryville, California, where I think the boogeyman himself used to live, is now a tremendous mecca of commerce and residential housing. So Chuck, I mean, I'm not going to try to add to what you said. I just want to thank you and say amen to that. And I think that that's the future of where we're going. And Mr. Vice Mayor, yes, more activity centers or whatever that looks like, but more for our youth, because I get calls and emails all the time, just like you do. What are our youth going to do? I mean, my daughter and my son, guess what? They moved out of Fairfield toward the Bay Area, toward Los Angeles, where there's more to do for our youth. And, you know, we really need to reckon with that. So once again, colleagues, thank you for making this very easy on me. And I think you're right on point with, you know, the mixed use housing and with the focus on our youth and where we need to be focusing on making sure they're engaged. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilwoman Bertani. Let me share an observation. It's an observation over a number of years. There were folks being assigned to Travis Air Force Base, and some of them had already done their research, and their conclusion was, I'll have to retire early because I can't afford to live in Fairfield, California. The cost of living is exceedingly higher than my base housing allowance would permit. And we worked very diligently to try to provide the kind of housing that they needed and that they could afford. The other concern that I have deals with climate change and how climate change is severely impacting continued development as we have done over the years. So let's spend a bit of time talking about that, for example. And part of my reasoning, of course, is we know now that some of the bridges, some of the 7 bridges through this Northern California area have to be replaced. And they have to be replaced with bridges that are higher than they are now. And that means, I'll use the train bridge between Benicia and Martinez. The train bridge oftentimes has to accommodate all the ships that are coming through that area to get to Sacramento and over to Stockton. That sounds simple, doesn't it? But the engines that are used on those freight trains only have limited power for so much. So that means the approach to the bridge has to be extended. In some cases, it's going to be up 680, more than 4 or 5 miles, because the locomotives can't haul up through there. So let's spend a few moments talking about climate change and what that means for Fairfield. And I'm particularly concerned about our comfort station when it comes to talking about water. And fortunately, our previous council members and city managers had the foresight to make certain that Fairfield had its adequate water supply from Lake Berryessa. That water supply is now being threatened because of climate change. So what are we going to do about things like that? And I'm very much concerned about the large water companies in Southern California and the fact that they are buying water rights from Northern California. And I'll use Benicia as another good example, separate point of view. Benicia at one point realized that the Army was going to move the depot out of Benicia. and they traded that depot site, but they lost the deep port possibilities that Benicia still has. So they don't have the shipping going in and out of there. So we don't want to make those kinds of mistakes either. But let's go back. Let's spend a bit of time talking about climate change and what that really means for Fairfield. And we just did that groundbreaking out at One Lake yesterday. That's not prime agricultural land. It never really was. So we didn't sacrifice anything by allowing development out there. Development that, as I mentioned earlier, does include affordable housing. And we complain about all the long lines on 680, Highway 12, and Interstate 80. And that's because people can't afford to live close to their jobs. And Fairfield has become a place for some professionals. And I'll give you one example. I talked to a couple. He's a physician, a teaching physician at UCSF, and his wife is a kindergarten teacher over in Elk Grove. And I said, "Why did you move here?" And he said, "It takes me 2 hours to get to work." And his wife said, "I can get from where we are on Gold Ridge over to Elk Grove in less than an hour." That's why we're here. So, climate change. Any comments, sir?
Yeah, those are great observations, and I want to remind everybody that our scope of work does include preparation of actually a climate action plan in addition to what we need to do in the general plan. So your thoughts are very timely, absolutely. We welcome thoughts and ideas of how, what we should do proactively to combat climate change, and also how we should adapt to the climate change. And you gave some really great examples. I had not even thought of the ships, needing more headway and the bridges needing to be, that's a clear example of how everyone is impacted. Yeah, thoughts, ideas of what we should do to prepare for the future. Is autonomous vehicles? Is it, EV areas? What else can we do to lessen our contribution to climate change? And how should we adapt our community to wildfires, urban heat, rising water, and all of these issues? Yeah, thoughts, ideas are welcome. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, this is Kat.
Councilwoman Moy, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's obvious that we are going through climate change. I think everybody agrees with that, I hope. And I actually, a couple days ago, sent an email to our assistant city manager about water rights. Because I think, as you probably recall, Mr. Mayor and my other colleagues, we've all been here for a long time. Some time ago, since I've been on here, we paid $1 million and bought more long-term water rights. And so I asked whether we could use some of our money that we're getting, the $20 million, $10 million we put aside already from the COVID, and buy more water rights somewhere. That's not going to be easy, but if we could do that, it would help I think people who are a lower income, with those things that they need, which is water. But as far as climate change, how far do you want to look out? Because we're in the middle of it heating up now, but everything's cyclical and it's going to change again, and we're going to be again someday, maybe not in our lifetime, but again in a cooling time. In fact, in the 80s, that's what they all talked about, that we were in a cooling time. So, we, I think, have to do at least temporary things, because we do have flood zones in Fairfield, and Susan City's going to need to do some things. And we're talking about how we're sister cities. We're going to need to plan together for that, because, they'll be underwater, some of it. And, we are going to have to do what we can to at least temporarily take care of those things. In the long run, it'll swing back. If you look over, my husband studied geology and geography, and he talks to me a lot about these things and how you can look in the Earth strata and see how climate has changed over the millennia. So while we're alive, we're going to continue to see the fires, so on. And I'll go back to what we were talking about earlier, and that is that we need to control some areas that may be wild now and could be open to wildfires or are, again, back in the valleys on that one side, on Susan Valley, back up in the Green Valley areas. We have to plan for the fires to be here, because they are going to be. And so, that's what I would think we would want to do, and continue in our city, of course, to, use the vehicles that use electricity now, although I'm not sure where we're going to get that, because we're going to have rolling blackouts again. So those things are important as far as planning, as far as future growth, which is what we're talking about here with the general plan. I think that we need to look at areas where we can control, again, the fuel, which is the grasses and so on that grow in areas, and also encourage us to do more walkable and livable communities, as my colleagues have talked about, and I have. And one of them, the mall, of course, is a great idea. And I concur with Mr. Matthews that is owned by a group of people, and we can't just impose on them. So it'll take some time, but it can be done. And the other thing that I would suggest, now I don't know anything about plants and trees so much, except to know that we need them, and they do help with greenhouse gases and the air that we need. So when we're planning future houses, whether they're single family or multifamily, we should have areas in there that have quote open space, if you will, with greenery, and make sure that's part of everything. I'm not talking about trees per se, because they get out of hand, but the people who are experts in that should help us in the planning to ensure that we are putting the right things in that don't use a lot of water, but do help us as far as the change that we need from the plants and so on, so we can breathe, actually. So those things I see very much inside our plans here with the general plan. So thanks. Sorry about my voice. I just have allergies.
Well, thank you. Councilman Tim, please.
Thank you. You bring up an interesting point on climate change. Right now we're doing the 680-80-12 interchange. That traffic's going to be there probably long after we're all in this room dead and buried. But more and more cars are becoming electric, and you bring up a very good point. Where are these people going to charge their vehicles? If you have an apartment complex, we're talking about high density housing. Obviously you'll lose a lot of lawn space, you won't be watering, but electricity will be important, because everything runs on electricity, and whether it's solar or turbine or hydroelectric, water's important. We get water from Lake Berryessa and Barker Slough. People very smart ensure that we'll have water, and we have the water. Now, if we have a severe drought, I don't know how we can plan for that, but we can take steps. And so what kind of vehicles are we going to have in 20 years? You see what the governor's mandate is, and whether it comes to fruition or not, I don't know, but more and more people are going electric. So how are we going to electrify a city? And is it easier? Chris Matthews talked about EDUs or tiny homes, and I think that's that's where we're going, and some people might not like it, but you're going to put a whole bunch of people in a smaller area. You need to make it livable. You need to make it affordable. Design your boundaries and figure out how you're going to get electricity. Correct me if I'm wrong, but more and more of our buses, right, Stefan, are electric and going electric. Our city corporation yard, I mean, putting in electrical chargers for the buses, garbage trucks, FedEx, Amazon. I mean, so the writing's on the wall. So how are we going to electrify the city? And I never thought of that until you started talking about climate change. And man, that's, I don't know. But I guess this is what we're here to figure out. And we can do it. We'll use water reasonably. You need your parks, you need your open spaces. It's got to cool. But we put, what, about 1,000 solar units on a year in the city of Fairfield, Stefan, if it's about right? We pretty tops in the nation as far as how many people are putting on solar. So more and more of that is coming, and can we do that with more and more businesses? Obviously, I think the answer is yes, and that would be through planning, and they're a lot smarter than I am on this, and we can plan for that. So again, I hearken back to where do you want the residential areas to be? What's your boundaries? We're okay with infill, we're okay with going up. Remember the old rumor, and maybe it's fact, but nothing in the city of Fairfield could be higher than City Hall? I mean, I heard that for years. And now you look at City Hall, and it's 4 stories, and you're thinking, oh man, I've been in buildings a lot bigger than that. And this is, I think, where we need to go. And climate change plays a big part of it. When will it change? I don't know. But you put more people on the earth and you consume more fossil fuels and air and whatever. How are we going to plan for that? Because Fairfield's going to grow. Every city around us is going to grow. And I just want to make sure that we're aware. And I don't know how to get there, but I'm open for suggestions. Thank you, Mayor.
Other comments, colleagues?
Mr. Mayor, this is Pam Bertani again, just to say once again, my colleagues are on point, including you. I mean, exactly. Climate change is real, it's here, and I think Catherine was really on point when she brought up the issue of, how we deal with, trees, how we deal with, wildlife, because, as a former biology teacher, what she was talking about is photosynthesis, period. And that's the process that allows us all to breathe oxygen right now. So I think that, you're right on point, Mr. Mayor. Global warming, how do we deal with it? And making sure that we have enough, making sure that we recognize, the importance of nature in our decisions, because nature will surely remember us in our decisions. So I think I'm very proud of my colleagues, and I just thank you all for your thoughtful comments. And we do need to make sure that we take into consideration this issue, Mr. Mayor, that you bring up, because it's real, it's scientifically reliable, it's proven, and we're looking at it right now. So thank you, colleagues. I appreciate you all.
Woman. Yes. Ma'am, would you come to the microphone?
Thank you. Very thoughtful discussion. Appreciate everyone's comments and interest in trying to make Fairfield a better place. My name is Marilyn Farley, former member of the City Council, and I'm interested in how Fairfield grows. I have been for probably 30 or 40 years. One thing that I wanted to touch on that I'd like you to address is that we have become a town of commuters. It's astonishing how many people live here but their work life is elsewhere. And that has really caused a drain on community life. And I think when we are shaping a new general plan, I would ask, are we tailoring it to serve existing residents, or are we focusing mostly on those new people who are going to come? Your existing condition study talked about the central Fairfield census tracts and how they meet the state definition or are very close to it for being a disadvantaged neighborhood. And these areas don't have stores, they don't have trees, they don't have parks. And I would argue that we need to give consideration to the people who already live here and not exclusively to the people who will be moving here. And then we used to say growth doesn't pay for itself. And I haven't seen any recent studies, but I do know that the city is struggling with pension and other costs. And so I would suggest that a component of this general plan be a financial plan that looks at cutting edge ways to run city governments, to provide the services that we need. The things that, Rick, you're talking about, youth centers. These things cost money. I've been going out to Travis to play tennis, and Airbase Parkway is crumbling. And we don't have the money to fix our infrastructure. And so when we think about trying to accommodate another 10,000 housing units and 30,000 more people, we need to have a way to pay for that that respects the people who already live here. And I know it's a huge challenge, but I think that it would be great if there could be an economic component to this study that would look at realistically, what are we going to be able to do? And what kinds of changes might we need to make in the way we think about financing local government in order to make this happen? Thank you.
Councilwoman Panduro, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question was just towards the climate action plan and when we would be able to see it or a draft of it.
It should be the same time as the general plan. I can go back to the timeline too, if that's helpful.
Yeah, because, I mean, we can talk about that, the strategies to use, but what we need to do is we need to understand what our future GHG conditions will be with the land use, with the transportation system, and what else do we need to do beyond that than to meet the state targets. So we need to go through that process to first determine what else do we need to mitigate. But as a policy, from a policy perspective, it's great, the discussion that we're having here right now. Yeah.
And I think the only thing I would add, in regards to EV stations is an increase in, I know there's going to be an increase in hybrid vehicles. I drive mine myself, and I already find it a challenge to find places to charge it. And I live in a location where there isn't any in maybe like a 10-mile radius. There's nowhere for me to charge my vehicle unless I come to City Hall or to the mall.
Good point, Tio.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Tim, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And Marilyn Farley, you bring up excellent points. And one of the things that I think we all hope for is when we talk about infill, whether it's people drive until they qualify, and by that I mean you get in the car and you drive and you see a sign that says house for $500,000 and you say, honey, what city are we in? Because we can afford that. And that's how I think a lot of people got here. But what I'm talking about specifically, at least for myself, is when we talk about the infill and the 10,000 homes and the 30,000 people, this is going to go into the city proper. And I would hope that, and again, building and planning knows more than I, but from developer fees, we get criticized a lot. You're putting houses out here and you haven't even built a road yet. Well, cities don't usually build roads. And if I say something that's not right, David, please correct me. developers build roads. We couldn't afford to build that. But what I'm hopeful is on infill, when they come in for a project, the city puts conditions and say, you have to fix this roadway, or you need to put lights at an intersection, or do whatever. So that's what I'm talking about is infill, and it raises the entire neighborhood. We've talked about Wi-Fi in neighborhoods when, especially this last year, kids that stayed home, especially in the lower socioeconomic neighborhoods, they didn't get Wi-Fi, and if they could, they couldn't afford it. These are the things that I'm looking at. I think all the council is looking at. So along with the growth, and growth doesn't pay its way, we have new fees and public safety fees and CFDs and everything, but it's very, very expensive. And you bring up a very good point, is where does the money come from? And that's a component, I think, where we want this and we want this, is how do you pay for it? And that's a large part of how this plan, I think, is going to operate. But like I said, you bring up a good point, and I just, at least for me, is we're not inviting new people to live here. We know they're going to come, but it will make the people that already live here, make their lives so much easier. Whether you widen a roadway, narrow roadway, put in bike lanes, traffic mitigation, charging stations, a new community center. These are all things that go into the growth, not just, hey, you come build a big high-rise or build more houses and we're going to let you run free. I think those days are pretty much over here. So hopefully that answers some of your questions. And I'll be more than happy to talk to you when we're done. But thank you.
Councilman Tim. Larisha, you're next, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. This has been an awesome discussion, so I haven't said much. I'm not the expert in climate change by any chance, but it is something that I'm very concerned about. And I think that we do need to start looking at implementing some incentives or requirements for new developments coming in, like which was mentioned earlier with sustainable landscaping. Maybe you have smaller yards, or you have yards that, you know, don't have grass areas, but maybe they have rocks or sustainable plants like the cacti. And then also, can we look at, as was mentioned earlier, the residents who are already here? Maybe we can have more apartment complexes adopt recycling, because I know a lot of the apartment complexes, they only have just regular dumpsters there, but they're not recycling. Can we look at that? And then what are we doing about the folks who already have really large yards that they're trying to keep up by watering because they don't want it to be a blight, or you know, it really starts looking bad. So what can we do? You know, can we create a program to where if you want to make your yard, you know, a sustainable landscaping, is there a way that we can provide a discount or help them do that? And what are we doing about the temperature in some of the housing that we have here already? Because there's lots of 100-degree days here, and growing up in Solano County, I know it didn't always used to be that way. Like 100-degree days they weren't rare out here, but they certainly weren't the norm like it is now. And there are a lot of places that don't have air conditioning, or, you know, a lot of places where they can't really afford to use the air conditioning because it's outdated. They don't have solar panels, so they're paying huge PG&E bills. So what can we do to help the residents that are already here? Especially I'm thinking about, you know, the seniors that, you know, are in sweltering heat, and they may have to go to the senior center to have like a cooling off location because they live in homes that may be a little older, even residents that moved here some time ago and moved in older homes that are not sustainable, and they're not up to par for this kind of weather. And I think my last thought is just, we're talking about development. I'm really a huge advocate for mixed use, especially when it comes to live work, because when you talk about doing more developments here, what we don't want to do is increase our carbon footprint by having more people commute, because we're already a bedroom community. So we don't want to build an apartment complex that doesn't offer an office space, doesn't offer some of the amenities that we're going to be using. And just to clarify, wouldn't it be great if more apartment units or whatever we're going to look at building, even if it's a tiny home community, if they offered like rentable office spaces? Because I think post-pandemic, a lot of people are not going to be going back to in-person work full time. A lot of people are going to be working from home or working, on location somewhere. And I know in Richmond, there's a particular area where they have a whole building just dedicated to rental offices. So if you only need to rent out an office for 3 months, 4 months at a time, you can do that. And the whole building is dedicated to that. So if we could have something like that that's incorporated with mixed use, then we can decrease the commuting. Because I am concerned that with increased development, we're going to increase traffic exponentially, especially if we don't have economic diversity here. And that's something I was actually trying to jump in on earlier when we talk about, the type of businesses that we have here in Fairfield. Are we economically diverse? If you want to make more than $50,000 a year, can you do it here in Fairfield? And I think that that's something that we really have to take a look at in order to, also talk about climate change. Because if you live in a town where, most of your jobs are, $50,000 a year or less, then people with degrees are going to commute. And that's just kind of how it works. And so that, in essence, impacts climate change. So I would really like to see a lot of economic diversity too, which I know is a little bit off the subject of climate change, but not. And I think with that economic diversity, just hearkening back to talking about ideas earlier and going back to like the question about North Texas, because I couldn't jump in quick enough. I would just like to see more diversity in the businesses here. And I would like for us to really look at reaching out and tracking more diverse businesses so it's not so repetitive in who's opening here. And I think especially we need more recreational things to do. I know downtown there's the courthouse and there's all these businesses. And to my knowledge, the one coffee shop that's closest to the courthouse is now gone. So it's really tough, especially if you're, a younger person that lives here and you want to do something recreationally. I mean, I know a lot of the gyms here don't offer swimming pools. And 24 Hour Fitness, which was one of the gyms that offered a pool or spa or whatever, they're now gone. So I think that when we're recruiting businesses, we have to also consider things like that. I'm thrilled about, the Dave & Buster's and things, but I think recreation, especially here in Solano County, outside of shopping, would really be helpful to not only us, but to the surrounding communities. So I'm going to get off my soapbox because I think that's all I had in my notes. Thank you.
Very much. Any other comments, colleagues, or questions? Let me raise one other issue. In the 1970s, some of us on the Planning Commission at that time were very much concerned about the continued viability of Travis Air Force Base. And we took a very formal position saying that encroachment should not threaten the continuing mission at Travis Air Force Base. Last year, the economic benefit to Solano County and this whole region was $2.1 billion. So we have to make certain in this general plan that we are going to make certain, absolutely certain, that we're doing everything we can to continue with the viability of Travis Air Force Base. Even though the mission will be changing, we expect that to happen. But that's an important element for all of us, and not just Fairfield and Solano County, but this whole Northern California area. So please keep that in mind too. And I hope we can spend some time in the next week or so talking about that as well. So, any other comments? Allison, please.
Everyone's comments this evening. So I just want to explain a little bit more about what comes next.
what development of the alternatives actually means. So we're going to come up with different concepts, maps, data, that takes into account everything that we've heard this evening, plus findings from the existing conditions report. So we heard about where youth centers, the need for more of them, and we'll put some on the maps, flooding and climate change, what areas might be at risk and how might that affect where we want to put different land uses, where housing should go and what type of housing that is in Fairfield. So development of that and the urban limit line. So we're also going to be asking the community to weigh in on what they think is best too, and then come back to you with the preferred alternative, which will form kind of the foundation of development of the full plan. I did just want to put in a plug for the website too for people listening at home. It's www.fairfieldforward.com. You can sign up for project updates and take a look at any of the documents that we talked about this evening. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time and your fantastic insight.
Mr. Childs, do you have any comments, please?
But I still think, though, that we definitely have to include something around pandemic planning. I mean, we don't know what that looks like, but we look at the economic devastation, young people not being able to go outside, all that pent-up energy. So we have to at least put that as a footnote and maybe do that offline. Maybe it doesn't go in the plan, but certainly, we can get ahead of it if this should happen again.
And sir, you were going to say something?
Oh, no, I was not going to say anything. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Councilman Bertani, you can go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I agree 100% with Elder Childs, because we didn't see this coming and it came. And thankfully, we had the infrastructure in place to deal with this pandemic, but this pandemic is, in my opinion, my lowly opinion, not over by any stretch of the imagination. So if there is an upticking or uprise in, the pandemic issue, I would hope that we are smart enough to make sure that we have contingency planning in place to deal with, a surge of the COVID-19 pandemic or any other pandemic that might come. So in terms of emergency planning, I think that it is incumbent upon us to make sure that we have something in place. Don't know what it looks like, don't know how it plays out, but something in place to make sure that we're able to address the issues that we've had a glimpse of over the last 16 months or so. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other comments, please? Until we meet again. So thank you very much for being with us this evening, and we'll look forward to our next get-together. Remember, the Heart of Fairfield plan is very, very important to our continued viability as a progressive city. So thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.